Hello, and welcome to your second edition of Trucking and Testing Tuesday. I'm Bridget Taylor with Taylor Made Trucker Service, and we're going to dive into a hot topic today. I know many of you hate hearing about the drug and alcohol program that companies who hire CDL drivers are required to have, but this is something very, very important to everyone who operates on the highways and byways. Now, think about this. If you are driving your personal car on the highway and you come in contact with a truck hauling up to 80,000 pounds, wouldn't you want the driver of that truck to be alert? Of course you do. And as the driver of that truck, if your family were riding on the highways and byways beside someone else, wouldn't you want that driver to be alert? Of course you would. Now, although we know that there are going to continue to be arguments about marijuana and its uses and how it affects the body, no matter what it is, in this industry, if marijuana is legal in your state and you operate a vehicle that requires a CDL, you are prohibited from using marijuana. The Federal Motor Carrier has and continues to publish that marijuana is still prohibited in this industry, and we need everyone to comply with it. Now, especially the owners and owner-operators who operate vehicles that require CDL, you are required to have a drug and alcohol testing program in place. And the Federal Motor Carrier has guidelines on how to operate this. Now, this handy-dandy book, Safety Regulations, you can find this in any truck stop, store, or you can buy it online. But this has all the information you need regarding the federal drug and alcohol program that's required for companies who hire and operate CDL vehicles. Now, I definitely, I'm not going to say demand, but I strongly require anyone who is doing business in the industry to get this book, read up on it, be aware of it. Because there are times that you are going to need to do drug and alcohol testing on drivers. And if there comes a time that those records need to be reviewed by the DOT or attorneys, and you don't have these in place, it could cost you a lot of money. It could cost you your business. So we want to make sure that these things are in place. Now, just think about this. I know that most of you that watch these videos are small business owners or owner operators and still fall in that small business area. So there are a lot of things that you're required to do. So, and some things you kind of skip over and don't get deep down into it. But I highly recommend that you dig deep into this and make sure that you have an understanding of what your requirement is as the owner of that business. Now, when you bring on a driver, especially a CDL driver, you are required to do pre-employment drug testing. Pre-employment drug testing for any driver that you put in a vehicle that requires the CDL. Now, I get a lot of people who say, yeah, I tested that person. I tested the driver, but they tested the driver after the driver started driving for them. And that's not how it works. So you have to do a pre-employment drug test before the driver gets in your vehicle. Yes, you have to have those results on file. Because just imagine, you hire, I'll just use myself as the example. You hire me as your driver, a CDL driver, and I go take the drug test today. Now, the results will not be ready today because they have to go through a testing process. So, but you put me out on the road this evening, and I'm out on the road all week, and then my results come back in on Friday, and I've tested positive for marijuana. And I'm out on the road. I have an accident. Thank God it's not fatal, but I have an accident. And those results came back that I tested positive for a prohibited drug. That could cost you a lot of money because you, as the company owner, if you get audited by DOT, you're going to get shut down for operating a CDL vehicle with a driver that did not pass a drug test, a pre-employment drug test. Also, the other car or vehicle that was involved in the accident, they're able to sue your company, and it is possible that negligence could be proved on your part, which could cause you to have to pay money out of your pocket for being negligent in running your business. So we want to make sure that we're operating safely and doing the right things. And I do understand that you want to keep your truck rolling, because if the wheels aren't turning, you're not earning. And I totally understand that. But we want to make sure that we're following the rules that are set up by the Federal DOT and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So remember, always do a pre-employment drug test on all of your commercial drivers. Pre-employment drug test. Wait till you get those results back before you put that driver in your commercial vehicle. The second type of test is a post-accident test. So anytime a driver has an accident, the driver will need to get tested for drugs and alcohol. And there are time limits on that. Now, I'm going to need you to go dig deeper into that, because there are certain things that typically will determine whether or not your driver needs to get tested. But you, as a general rule, if a tow truck, an ambulance, or a hearse are involved, a test has to be done. So an alcohol test for post-accident must occur within 8 hours after the accident. Drug test 32 hours after the accident. And as the owner of the company, you want to make sure that you get these things done as quickly as possible. Because remember, we're not only making sure that our driver is okay, but we also want to make sure that we're following the Federal Motor Carrier regulations. So make sure that you dig deeper on those post-accidents, and make sure that you are in communications with your driver and arrange for your driver to go get those post-accident tests. Remember, alcohol test within 8 hours after the accident, drug test within 32 hours after the accident. So the next test is a random drug and random alcohol. All CDL drivers are required to be registered in a random drug and alcohol consortium. Now, what this means is that your driver is selected randomly out of the consortium to be tested for drugs and or alcohol. Now, they could be selected at the same time for both, or depending on how the consortium does their random selection, it could be 1 month they do drug, next month alcohol, but the driver may or may not be selected. But when you are notified that the driver is selected and you notify the driver, you need to send that driver immediately to get tested. So the whole purpose of this is to make sure that drivers are operating safely and that they're not using drugs or alcohol while they are operating commercial vehicles. It's prohibited. And remember, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the drivers are safe and that the highways and people that are operating on these highways are safe. Because remember, this equipment is very heavy and can if involved in an accident, lead to fatalities. And we don't want that. We want to reduce accidents, and especially fatal accidents. So please make sure that you're following these guidelines and register your CDL drivers in a random consortium. If you don't have a random consortium or a drug and alcohol program set up within your company, please give us a call and we can help you. 980-299-1572. Okay, the next test we have is reasonable suspicion. And a lot of companies, unfortunately, skip over this. And this could be something that is very, very, very important when it comes down to an accident or preventative measures. Now, we can understand that, there are certain things that we can recognize when someone's under the influence of drugs or alcohol. But the Federal Motor Carrier does require any company that hires CDL drivers and must have someone who is trained on reasonable suspicion. And what that is, if they come in contact with someone that they feel is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they can send that driver for a reasonable suspicion drug and or alcohol test. Now, of course, when you do that, you don't want that driver to drive because you have suspicion that that person is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So we need to make sure that if you hire CDL drivers, that you have someone who deals with those drivers on a regular basis to be trained on reasonable suspicion. Now, we have a special because we have noticed that many of our clients do not have anyone trained on reasonable suspicion. So if you are currently in our drug and alcohol consortium, then when you renew, we're giving you the opportunity to take the reasonable suspicion training class with your renewal. And if you're joining our consortium, we are going to throw that class in for you to one person within your company to get trained on reasonable suspicion. And they will get a certificate saying that they're trained on reasonable suspicion. And that will be the person within your company who can refer a driver to be tested for reasonable suspicion. Now, that part is very tricky, and the Federal Motor Carrier has rules and regulations regarding this. And I'm going to say, go back to that Federal Motor Carrier website or read your handy dandy book to make sure that you're aware of the guidelines as it relates to reasonable suspicion testing. The next test we have is return to duty. Now, this is for any driver who has tested positive for drugs or alcohol. And at this point in time, that person should be going through a substance abuse program and have already went through a substance abuse professional to receive the counseling that's required and have a follow-up plan on how they will be tested after they return to duty. Now, this is where the clearinghouse comes into place. The clearinghouse database will have information showing that this driver has completed the substance abuse program and is able to do a return to duty test. And once that driver passed the return to duty test, it is posted within the clearinghouse and they're out of the prohibited status, and you can hire them on to be a CDL driver. But of course, you have to continue with the plan as the substance abuse professional has designed. Now, remember, return to duty means that the driver has tested positive for either drugs or alcohol. So we want to make sure that we're treating these drivers properly as the substance abuse professional has guideline in their plan. And we do not want to keep them hanging out there and not finishing up the follow-up plan, which is the last test within this. The follow-up tests are determined by the substance abuse professional. They will tell you how many follow-up tests the driver that tested positive for drugs or alcohol must do in order to continue driving. If that driver does not complete the follow-up plans within the time frame that is listed in the plan from the substance abuse professional, then that driver will not be released out of that clearinghouse status. So they will stay in that follow-up status until they finish all the testing guidelines by the substance abuse professional. I highly recommend that anyone who hires CDL drivers, or if you're an owner-operator and you have a CDL, you operate CDL required vehicles, to get this book. Also, go to the Federal Motor Carrier Clearinghouse website and review all of this information. It's very important that you know. Ignorance will not excuse you from complying with these regulations. So it is very important that you have an understanding of what your requirements are. And if you need assistance, give us a call. We can help you. Testing is one of the things that we do, and we want to make sure that everyone complies with the Federal Motor Carrier regulations. So please, 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 please do not push this to the side, because when an accident happens, it may just be too late for you to catch up on these tests that were required that you didn't do. The pre-employment drug test, post-accident, random testing, reasonable suspicion testing, return to duty, and follow-up. So we want to make sure that you're compliant at all times and that your drivers are compliant with the Federal Motor Carrier regulations and that they're following your company policies and not using prohibited drugs or alcohol while they are operating your commercial vehicle. And remember, every mile matters, every test counts. And this is your Tuesday tune-up on Trucking and Testing Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you at our next tune-up. Thank you. This rig is going dark. Have a great day and be safe. Bye-bye.